Awesome. Well, welcome tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm David. For those of you that don't know me, I know we have a few new participants, and I'm really excited to share the aligned living methods with you. And the first two steps out of the kind of the seven main ones, but these first two are really powerful. And so, in order to understand aligned living, really one of the things we need to understand first are energy fields. And there's been a lot of really interesting scientific experiments, scientific experiences that we've had around energy fields that are just really kind of hard to explain. It's almost like the more we know, the more confused science is about it. And so I wanted to start by sharing an experience going back to the 9/11 horrific experience with the attacks on the trade towers and the Pentagon and everything. That there was something really interesting that happened worldwide when that happened. There was this kind of outpouring of heart energy. And generally what drives our electromagnetic fields is our brain and our hearts. And so whenever there's big experiences that happen on the planet that we collectively feel, there's a surge in the resonance of the planet in what we call the Schumann resonance. And what happens is there's a spike in the frequency. And that was exactly what happened on 9/11, is that there was this massive spike of heart energy, of electromagnetic energy that just went around the planet. And so, there's no surprise that happened. And there's sensors that we have that are actually recording this. And so, of course, it showed up on there. But the part that's really fascinating to me is I'm going to ask you kind of a trick question in here in just a second. If you already know the answer, just give other people a chance to kind of process through this. But how long would you guess that it took for that kind of electromagnetic field, that heart wave, so to speak, to run around the planet, to raise the frequency, to raise the Schumann resonance of the planet? What would be your best guess of the time period between the first attacks and when it started showing up in the electromagnetic field? And so if I want to have anybody that wants to take a guess or a swing at it, just unmute yourself, and love the participation. So anybody have any guesses about how long what the time period was? Any brave people out there that want to guess? We need a volunteer. No takers? All right. Or are you trying to figure out how to unmute yourself? It should be, if you move your across the bottom of the screen, there should be a on the bottom left, there's a little microphone where you can mute or unmute. And on the phone, there should be a button too. But if we don't have any takers, I'll go ahead and just give you the answer. That most people guess that it was like 45 minutes or 40 minutes, half hour, maybe 15 minutes, or immediate. But the really interesting thing about it is that it actually happened prior to the event. I think it was like 45 minutes prior to the event. It may have even been longer than that. There was this increase in the Schumann resonance. There was this huge heart wave that ran around the planet. And this is where science gets really confused. That for some reason, much like animals before an earthquake or a tidal wave where they run to higher ground, that we're animals as well. And that we have these experiences where we respond to it. And so when we try to understand our energy fields, what we really know is that our energy fields are affecting us, they're affecting other people around us, and there's something going on with it. And so I thought that experiment was really fascinating. And in fact, I've noticed a lot of times when we start to do workshops like this, or whenever I've led workshops, I often hear from people saying that they started to feel shifts in themselves prior to even getting started. And so if once you signed up, if you started to feel some sort of shift in yourself, if you started to kind of feel different coming in tonight, we're going to be going through some shifts tonight. And for some reason, our electromagnetic field is able to feel them quite often prior to them happening, much like what happened on 9/11. And so several reasons to share that. And so another experiment that I wanted to share with you is something that was done in the ESADE school in Barcelona, Spain, which is this rather famous, prestigious business school. And they were doing a case study where they were trying to figure out how to identify the emerging leaders, who it is that's going to show up and lead the group. And so part of their experiment is they hooked everybody in the group, these 30 MBA students, up to EEGs and EKGs. And then they just gave them case studies, broken down into groups of 5 or 6, and monitored their behavior and their vital signs to see what would happen. And something really interesting did happen. You see, in the first 20 minutes, every time, 20 to 30 minutes, they could identify who was going to be the emerging leader, who it was that was going to show up that other people were going to follow. And it wasn't really what you would think it was. It wasn't like the charismatic person or the loudest person, or the one with most expertise. Really, what the answer was is the person who was ever stabilized the most internally, the person that wasn't being affected by their surroundings. All the rest of the people in the group over that short period of time started to entrain or sync up with that leader. And it happened again and again as they conducted the experiment. Each time they could look at who was stabilized internally, who wasn't fluctuating, and naturally everybody just resonated to them and started syncing up to them, looking to them to lead. And so again, that's interesting. But here's where it kind of gets spooky to another level, is that what they found is that not only did people look to them to lead, but they also started to sync up with their vital signs. So what the EEG and EKG was monitoring, they actually started to sync up and match up their internal functions with that of the leader. And so when we think about the effects that people in our surroundings have, I think of our energy field kind of like the wireless effect, that just by being in the proximity of people, or what we've found even just thinking of people or thinking of situations, we start to have some sort of an effect on us. And we often feel like we're the ones making decisions. But when we take that into consideration, we realize that if our physiology actually changes just by being in the presence of somebody else, what does that do with our thinking? What does that do with how we're seeing the world? What does that do with the choices we make? And this is something that Nikola Tesla, the famous scientist, picked up way, way back. And this is a quote I used actually in my book. And so this quote's from 1915, and it's on the chapter I wrote about entrainment. And so let me just read this quote to you really quick. And I just thought it was fascinating. So think about this. This was 1915, so 105 years ago. He said, "The human being is a self-propelled automaton." And automaton is basically like a robot. It's like it doesn't have its own thinking, that it just runs programs, so to speak. And so here it is. The human being is a self-propelled automaton entirely under the control of external influences. Willful and predetermined though they appear, his actions are governed not from within, but from without. He is like a float tossed about by the waves of a turbulent sea. And you can read more in my book, Insight, Influence, and Flow. You can find on Amazon. I had to give a little plug for that. But that quote from Nikola Tesla, I don't think it's quite as severe as that quote represents. But what I am very clear on is that there is a massive effect that we're having. And so when I looked at that study from the ESAD School of Barcelona, Spain, and we saw all these people being affected by these individual leaders, by these stabilized people that were holding their internal stability, what is it that those people were in training? If the others, the followers, were in training with the leader, what was the leader in training with? And so, the answer doesn't really matter that much. It could be that they have these really strong religious beliefs that they feel stabilized in, that may be the way that they were brought up. It may be the way they were treated as children. It may be that they're just super confident. And it really doesn't matter what it is that takes us there. The fact is that the more stabilized internally we are, the more we're in control of our world, the more that we're actually in control of the decisions that we're making. And it's something really fascinating to think about. And that's one of the first things that we realize with aligned living, is that we have been tapped in to this external world. We've been referencing externally how we know our inner world. And the first steps that we'll be going through tonight are how to shift that 90% external, 10% internal referencing to the reverse, where we're referencing 10% external and 90% internal, which, you know, it's really important that we're aware and we're empathetic and that we're taking into consideration everybody else. But when like 80 or 90% of what we're feeling internally is driven by those surroundings, when our self-concept is driven by those surroundings, it really makes it hard for us to get in touch with who we are and what we want. And so let me just share this slide with you really quick. And it's basically three kind of assumptions. There we go. That we're making from those experiments. And the first one is we are always being massively influenced by our surroundings, particularly by other people. And so, of course, we've known that from the perspective of, you know, people's opinions, you know, the expressions they get, the positive feedback we get, or the negative feedback we get. But really, as we start to study electromagnetic fields and our energy fields, there's a lot of information that's being passed wirelessly, so to speak, between us and our surroundings. And it massively influences what's going on internally. So number two, the choices we make are often more about what others want for us or from us rather than what we want for ourselves, and we usually don't even know it. And what I mean by that is that because our perspective gets shifted by the people we're surrounded by, that they're influencing what we think we want just simply because it's affecting where we're looking at the world from. The things that feel positive, or the things that feel negative, the things that feel comfortable, the things that feel uncomfortable. And as we break free from that, which we'll be playing with shortly here, into that sovereign state, into that place of really feeling what it feels like to feel your internal direction, to not feel so pushed and pulled by your surroundings, you'll get a much greater sense of this. And so as I'm reading this, if these feel kind of harsh, if they kind of feel maybe a little bit overstated, just kind of humor me, I guess, or humor yourself, humor us for a few minutes as we go in and do these experiments, because we're going to do some concrete shifts that will actually give you the internal experience of what we're talking about. And so don't write it off yet if it feels outrageous to you. All right. And so the third is that most people focus more on what they perceive as wrong and try to solve the problem, the perceived problem, rather than focusing on what they want and then creating it. Most of our problem solving is really about trying to alleviate discomfort. And so this is one of the other big shifts that happens as we start to move into, I'll stop the share here so you can bring it back on me. This is one of the other big shifts that happens as we start to move into that aligned living state, is that we start to realize that so much of what we're experiencing from the feedback from our surroundings has been making us feel uncomfortable internally. We may just, you know, always feel kind of squirmy in our body, or there's something that's just kind of either a light anxiety or an intense anxiety. You know, it's amazing. Anxiety is just like such a common part of so many people's lives. And what I've found through being externally referencing and being internally referencing is that our experience with anxiety, our experience with that push and pull, changes completely. And so one of the things that happens then is when we're referencing internally, there's a different level of comfort that shows up. And things that are going on outside there around us that used to drive a lot of our decision making, because we'd say, I don't like the way that's going, that feels uncomfortable, I need to do something about it, or I don't like the way this person's operating, or I wish this needs to be different, or that needs to be different. And all these things that kind of get us caught up in this isn't okay, it needs to be different, really derails us from creating what it is that matches us in our lives, what really makes us happy, what makes us feel fulfilled and vibrant and full of life. And we get derailed by that all the time. And so something fascinating happens when we disconnect from that discomfort, find the comfort inside, is that next right action, the thing that we want to do in order to move forward and create what it is that we want, starts to become much, much more available to us. Because generally we're focusing on like, oh, I don't like that, I need to change that. And these are all symptoms out here, things that are making us upset. And it was funny, I was trying to explain this concept to a client of mine who's a chiropractor. And he was saying, you know, I think I get it, but I'm just not quite sure. I said, well, think about this. If somebody comes into your office and their hip is sore, right? Do you work on their hip? generally, or where do you work? And he's like, well, no, I don't work on their hip. I work on their spine, because that's really where the problem is. That's what needs to be corrected. If I worked on their hip, it would just keep going back out again because their spine's out of alignment. And that's kind of how our experience quite often is in life. We're so busy working on the perceived problem, working on our hip, instead of aligning our spine, which is just going to solve the problem completely. All right. So really interesting stuff as we step into this. And so I want to give people a chance to, if there's anything about these concepts as I talk about them that, that feel confusing, or if there's a comment that wants to show up, feel free to unmute yourself. And again, I realize I'm not sure on the phone calls if it's easy to unmute yourself. Can anybody on the phone unmute themselves and just let me know if that's easy to do?
It is, if you tap your phone.
Okay, great. Awesome. So does anybody have any questions or anything so far? That I'd love for this to be interactive.
David, this is Jill. I'm just wondering if you're going to be talking about, I assume you are, how we go about focusing more on the internal.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will be having that experience. I'm just going to keep teasing you with it and talk about why it's so hard in your life and why it's such a problem. And then I'll say, have a good night. And
okay.
Absolutely. I won't leave you hanging on it. I know it's funny. I was doing this like a live workshop with this, and as I was describing, I was deciding, I'm like, there's one other case study I was thinking about sharing, and somebody interrupted me, and they're like, you know what? We get it. Like, now I'm feeling uncomfortable. Can you just show me how to not be there? Now I'm feeling it really intensely. So absolutely. We'll play with the energetics of it, and we'll go through the process. So thanks, Jill. Awesome. So, it's interesting. I'm an empath and, a highly sensitive person. So I'm always somebody that was massively affected by my surroundings. And so I don't know how many of you identify as empaths or as HSPs, highly sensitive people, but generally those are the people that are really sensitive to stuff that's going on. It could be loud noises. It could be aggressive energy. It could be, it doesn't really matter what it is that we feel it internally. And so for me, these techniques were something that was just, when they did come to me about 4.5 years ago, they were such a lifesaver. I was actually living down in Southern California at the time, which was kind of the perfect place for me to need that, because there's such a high population density and there's just so many energetic people that it was really, really an intense setting for me to be in. And having these tools that we will get to in just a minute. I mean, it changed my ability to be in different settings. And so I'm so excited to share that with others. And we'll do just that. We'll go ahead and jump into the next stage of it, the first step, which is what I call the consciousness lock. And so let me explain a little bit about what we're going to be doing so it makes sense, that you can kind of have some intellectual framework, some structure to play with it with. And then we'll do it. Then we'll have the experience. And so the reason I call it consciousness lock is that it's actually named after an airlock. And so an airlock is something that they have like in submarines. They have it on, let's say, the space shuttle. And what it is basically a chamber. And so if we look at the space shuttle example, when an astronaut's out on a spacewalk and they want to come back into the shuttle, they couldn't just open up the door to the shuttle and walk in, because the vacuum of space would suck the pressurized cabin of the inside of the shuttle out, and the inside of the shuttle would be a vacuum, which would not be good. So they created something called an airlock, which is a little chamber, and it has a door to the outside and a door to the inside. And so the door to the inside is closed. They open the door to the outside to space. The astronaut can go in, close the door behind them, and then pressurize that little chamber, that little airlock, and then open up the airlock so that the astronaut can go into the shuttle. And it creates kind of a safe way to move from one atmosphere to another. And so we're going to be doing something very similar to that energetically. We're going to be moving from that external atmosphere to the internal atmosphere. And just like with a space shuttle or a submarine, that when, I always have this joke that say, there's a reason that there's no screen doors on a submarine. Like there has to be a very clear separation. And what I found with our consciousness, with our sense of experiencing the external world and the internal world, if we don't create a very clear delineation, a very clear separation, they end up just bleeding back and forth. And when we do that, that electromagnetic information and the emotional energy that we get inundated with when we're in emotional situations runs back and forth. And it's really important that we have an understanding of it, that we, like I said, that we have that empathy, that we can feel it, but it's also really important that it doesn't overrun us. And so true empathy, for those of us that have it, that ability to feel inside of ourselves what people around us are feeling, it's a beautiful thing. But when we can't control the amount of it that's running through us, it just completely overwhelms us. And it makes it really hard for us to support people around us without there being a really big cost to it, because it's contagious, right? And so if we're connecting with a friend who's in a real sense of suffering, we want to be there for them, but we really feel it inside of ourselves as well. And what I've found is that when we can regulate the amount that we're feeling, which again, we'll do in just a minute, we're able to be there so much more fully and intensely and in greater awareness for the people that need us. And we're able to understand so much more because we're not being put into crisis by moving into a support role, which often happens, into that overwhelm. And so this first step we're going to do is the consciousness lock. And it's very simple. There's an interesting piece of how we do this, because it's a little bit illogical, because we're simply using our imagination to make these changes. And so if I were to say to you, okay, I want everybody to take their pointer finger and put it to their nose, that there wouldn't be a thought process of how you're going to take your finger and put it to your nose. It's just, you just see yourself doing it. It just happens. And so when we're working with our energy field, it's very much the same way. There's not a doing, there's just really a seeing it happen. There's no step between you deciding to put your finger to your nose and you doing it. It just happens. And so we're going to be using our imagination to visualize these shifts that we're going to talk about in just a second. And it just happens, just like moving our hands. And so the way it will work, and I'm going to explain it first, and then I'll give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you may have, and then we'll go through it. And so we're going to just close our eyes and take some deep breaths in a minute, getting a sense of what we're feeling. And from this place, we're going to start to use our imagination to feel out into our surroundings. See if we can pick up other people that are maybe walking around, other people in the house. We may even feel each other that are on this call. And just get a sense of our surroundings, really letting it expand out, letting our electromagnetic field expand out and just search and feel around us. And then I'm going to ask us to just imagine the part of our electromagnetic field, our emotional body, that reads all of that information and plays it inside of us to start to separate and lift up. And we're going to put our hands out with our palms open. And we're going to imagine our palms represent all of those sensors. And I like to just use the analogy of, like, if they were cameras and microphones that we're using to read our surroundings, that we are going to put them out and our hands will represent those. And here's the thing with these cameras and microphones, that they're actually playing on a speaker or a screen inside of us. And so if we're recording the external world and playing it in here, that's our experience. That's external referencing, or the clearest analogy I can think of that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn off those cameras and microphones, those emotional bodies, and I'll guide you through this. So we're going to imagine them reading all of this, and then as I say, as I talk us through it, we'll close our hands into a fist, bring them down to our laps, and we'll just picture our emotional body and all the energy, all those cameras and microphones, just dropping down into this little bubble, into this chamber, this consciousness chamber, much like an airlock, this consciousness lock. And we'll stay there for a minute and we'll just have the experience. And so before we do this, I wanted to give you all a chance to ask any questions you may have. And so any questions? And again, I'm going to walk you through it, so don't feel like you need to have those directions memorized. I just wanted to give you a heads up before we did it, so you had a sense of this is what we're doing. And so any questions? showing up for anybody before we drop in? Again, feel free to just unmute yourself. No? All right. Great. So before we do this, I want you to just take a minute and I want you to think about something that you've experienced maybe today or throughout this week that's been one of those kind of frustrating things. Maybe it may have even been whatever you thought of when I was talking about when we're external referencing, whatever it is that we feel like is a problem, whatever we feel like, oh, this isn't okay, this needs to change. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's an experience you had. And so I want you to just take a minute with that experience and close your eyes and just remembering and experiencing how it showed up for you, whether it was today or earlier in the week, and just take a minute to be with it and see what shows up for you and see how it feels. Really feeling into it. All right. And so we're going to use that as a reference point. So remember when I was talking about the way things feel, the way we experience the world when we're referencing external versus when we're referencing internal, there's a substantial difference. And so those things that are getting all of our attention, those urgent problems that we keep feeling like we need to solve, that maybe if we were just in alignment, that they're just symptoms of us being pulled into other people's stuff or being pulled out of our own truth about what we want to create and we get distracted by. It'll be interesting to just see how that experience shows up for you as we go internal. And so any other questions? Last chance for questions before we drop in and go through this consciousness lock. No? All right, awesome. So here we go. So we'll just take some nice deep breaths. Take a minute to just breathe and settle in. Feel free to close your eyes. And as you do, I want you to just allow your energy field, just through your imagination, to just reach out into your surroundings like those cameras and microphones. And just start to see what you can pick up. See if you can pick up people in other rooms or out to the street, or like I said, other people on this call, just seeing what you're showing up and really let your energy field out, really letting it just flow out there. And just, again, if this feels like you're just pretending, that's fine. We're just using the imagination to see what shows up. Beautiful. And now we're going to take a minute to just put the hands out with the palms open. And we're going to take those cameras and microphones, that emotional body, we're going to ask it to just start to lift up. And so as I just lift my hands up, we're just going to visualize all those cameras and microphones kind of lifting up above our head instead of being around us. I'll just support you with this too, because as we're discovering about electromagnetic fields, that just through thinking about other people, we tend to connect with theirs. There's this wireless connection that we have. And then what we're going to do is, in just a second, we're going to close our hands into fists, bring them down to our lap, and we're going to visualize all the emotional body, all those cameras and microphones turning off and dropping into that consciousness lock, that little bubble around us, just containing ourselves into this little space. And again, this isn't where we're going to end up. This is just a place we're going temporarily because we need to go through the consciousness lock before we can go into the shuttle or into the submarine. And we're going through this before we can go into our internal self, into that deep part of ourselves that really knows us. So as we're ready, go ahead and close the hands into a fist, bring them down to your lap, allowing yourself to just drop fully into your body. And just take a minute to let that bubble, that consciousness lock, close in over the top of the head and around the back and sides, below the feet. And just being here for a minute and just take inventory of what you're experiencing. So is there anybody that wants to share about what they're noticing as we drop into the consciousness lock? And remembering that this isn't where we're headed. We're just going through the lock in order to get to that internal space, into that internal state. So what are people noticing?
quiet and still.
Yeah, it's often the first thing that people notice is that just this really, really quiet feeling, still feeling. Absolutely. Thanks.
One of the things that I noticed is, I'm used to doing the imagining the emotional body moving up above without the airlock. And what I've noticed with the airlock, that I even sorry, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. But I'm getting even more quiet than usual.
Yeah, that step makes it even quieter. Yeah, and Angelique's done this this technique a few times before, right? Quite a few times. Nice. Anybody else want to share about what they're experiencing? You may find yourself as you're listening kind of opening up a little bit. So we'll go ahead and just open up and let yourself kind of go back in for a second. And so generally when people first go there, there's this kind of odd feeling of it being super still, super silent. Once we stay there a little bit, people start to feel a bit disconnected, like they feel really separate from their surroundings. And again, remember, this isn't where we're going to stay. We're just going through that consciousness lock, that little bubble. And of course, I mean, it would make sense it would feel separate. It would make sense it would feel kind of cut off and isolated. But we're basically doing is just turning off that part of ourself that we may consider an extrasensory part of ourselves that can read our surroundings, that can read other people's fields. And when we turn that off, all of a sudden, when we're used to having all this information running at us all the time, it just stops. And, for me, prior to receiving this experience of how to do this, the only time I ever felt that way was maybe in the woods or, I love to go outside in the wintertime because it was just that dead silence. And it's a really interesting piece that you can just achieve it by taking that part of you that's reading all of that and shutting it off temporarily. And so we'll do that again a second time in just a minute. But I'm really curious, is there anybody else that wanted to share now that we're kind of slowly returning back to that space? And maybe people that haven't done it before or that it's new to. Anybody want to share about their experience? And again, you don't have to, but it's always fun to have some good interaction and people sharing their experiences. Any takers?
Hey, I noticed that the concern that I imagined and remembered that's been going through my mind for the last couple of days, it left.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it there.
Yeah.
And it was just a split second.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And once we open up inside, it's to a whole nother degree too, but it's we basically cord with things. So we run energetic cords, we run connections with things, we entrain with stuff. And when we stop entraining with it, it doesn't feel as important. It just doesn't have the same value to it. And then we start to get to pick or even feel internally what it is that really is valuable to us, what it is that really is important. And so it's really fascinating. And so why don't we go ahead and we'll do the consciousness lock one more time. And if you didn't feel it really intensely the first time, quite often the second time it shows up a little bit more intense for whatever reason. It's just getting comfortable with going through the process. And we'll be there for just a second. And if anybody feels like there's something they want to share as we go back in, please do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the next stage, the second part. As I said, we're going through the first two stages of aligned living, the first two steps out of the 7. And so the second step is going to be opening internally. And this one is really interesting. So the same cameras and microphones, so to speak, that extrasensory self, the emotional body, however we want to describe it, when we open that up and turn it back on internally, that same ability to read and feel our surroundings now happens internally. And so with the intensity that we experience our surroundings, now we start to experience our internal self with that same level of intensity. But the difference is it's not overwhelming. It's us. It's resonance. It's really who we truly are. And I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to put ideas into your head about what you're going to experience or even guide that experience. I want you to just have the experience. And so, like I said, we're going to shut down again in just a second. This time we won't expand out first. We will lift up the emotional body or the cameras and microphones and then turn them off. But we won't expand out first. I just did that to help create the contrast so that you have a more powerful experience with it. All right, so anything else before we go? You guys ready to drop back in, and then we'll go to the second step of opening up internally? All right, sounds good. So we'll go ahead and close our eyes again, taking some deep breaths and settling in as we start to notice what we're tapping into externally. We're gonna take our hands and just lift up that emotional body, all those cameras and microphones, that extrasensory self. As we start to just imagine up above our heads. As we feel ready, go ahead and close the hands into a fist, bring them down to our laps, and just picture that turning off all the extrasensory self, all the cameras and microphones, and allowing that bubble to close over the top of the head. And as you do, just dropping fully into your body, grounding into your body. And that bubble close over the top of the head, that consciousness lock on the back and sides, below the feet. And there's this signature quiet that comes in that really lets you know you're fully in it. There we go. Nice. So hopefully everybody's experiencing the quiet. Is there anybody that's not quite there? I can give you a little extra boost of support. Just let me know. Feel free to unmute. Awesome. So now we're going to take our hands still closed in a fist, and we're going to put one over the heart and one over the solar plexus, that region just below the ribs in the center of the body. In just a second, we're going to visualize, using our imagination, those same cameras and microphones, that same emotional body turning on internally. And so as you're ready, go ahead and open up your hands and visualize it opening up internally. As you do, we're just going to invite in this beautiful channel of light, that exact frequency of you just flowing through the top of the head and allowing it to flow through the back of the brain and spinal column. So allow that beautiful white light to flow down through the neck, allowing it to flow down each vertebrae as it fills through the heart, continuing down, flowing down each vertebrae all the way down to the base of the spine, out the base of the spine to the earth, out the bottom of the feet into the earth, and let it go deep, deep, deep down to the earth, way, way down, past all the human impact, all the way into that we call the sacred earth, just way, way, way down. And then you go deeper and deeper and deeper until we feel that lift of energy, that groundedness. And as we do, we're going to invite that same beautiful white light coming from the earth now back up through the feet, through the base of the spine as it flows up each vertebrae, filling through the heart, through the back of the neck, brain, spinal column, out the head, top of the head. As you do, just imagine your awareness moving from the front of the brain all the way to the back of the brain, seeing if you can bring your whole self right into the back of by the spinal column, and just see what starts to show up as we invite that light to just flow through. A lot of times people just feel the sense of movement and flow. And so I'd love to hear from people as they experience this. And as you do, I'm going to bring something up here in just 1 second as you allow yourself to slide to the back of the brain and feel that flow. So I want you to bring back in whatever it was, that experience that you brought in earlier, and just see how it shows up from here. So not going into what you thought you knew about it, excuse me, not going to any stories, but just seeing how it shows up for you from here, how it feels from here. I'd love to hear people's experiences this year. Feeling ready? So what are people noticing?
I feel a sense of security.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's like a safety, is that?
Complete sense of security. Like nothing, I'm almost indestructible in a way.
Awesome. Yeah, and the more sensitive we are to our surroundings, the more that feeling of like, oh, it can't push me around. From inside this place, I can really feel powerful. I don't, I'm not being so impacted by my surroundings.
Totally.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Brian. Yeah. Does anybody want to share about how their experience from the week or whatever it was frustrating them, how it feels from inside here, from this?
I would say I didn't feel as reactive.
Yeah, yeah. Is it fair to say it doesn't feel quite as important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And so what happens then when that isn't as uncomfortable, when we're not as reactive to it, all of a sudden it frees us up where we don't have to engage with it, whereas quite often there's an impulsiveness, there's a reaction. But when we get to choose now our multiple choice bank of what feels available to us, whereas before maybe there was only A, like I got to do something about that. But when we bring it internal, maybe A doesn't feel like that good of an option anymore. Maybe it's not even on the table anymore. Sometimes inaction, sometimes just looking at it and going, okay, that's what's happening. Not that big a deal. But quite often it's about some sort of a next right action that may not even feel connected to what the problem was, but in truth solves it. Like the chiropractor that doesn't adjust your hip where it's sore, they adjust the spine because that's what's causing the problem with the hip. And so many of the challenges we have in life are not about what we think they are. You know, we're just moving pieces around the puzzle as opposed to solving the puzzle by being in that next right action, by being in that internal space. Very cool. So anybody else want to share about what they're experiencing?
It feels to me like it's, well, it's a little bit like I'm looking down at the earth from a spaceship.
Yeah, we can think of it as an ascended state. And that's really, what it is. Our frequency becomes this really, really high frequency. And so it's really interesting what happens is our perspective changes. We're not looking at it. I talk about it as like the Z axis. If you remember that from math, there's the X and the Y, right? That's a flat plane that, you're moving back and forth on trying to center yourself. But Z is the vertical. And so what we're really doing is that we're affecting our vertical. We're leaving that flat plane of the 3D world. It's really a 2D world when you look at it from that perspective. But we're leaving that established way of looking at things. And when we bring ourselves up in frequency, all of a sudden now we've added another variable in, where not only are we centering ourselves at the origin, at the middle of the X and Y axis of finding our truth in that, but when we lift ourselves up the Z-axis, as we're in this state right now, things look and feel different because it's like we're in a different location. We're looking at things from a different place. And as Angelique described so well, that feeling of, it's like all that's going on down there, and it's not as important to me as I thought it was. And what I mean by that is not that people aren't important or that situations aren't as important, but they're not as impactful. Really what becomes important is our truth, our next right action. And we can still really engage fully with our surroundings, but we're not pushed and pulled around them. Other people's agendas. Remember those first 3 pieces where we're massively influenced by our surroundings, that we're making decisions to please other people, and often we don't even know it. That's not happening at the same level. That we are not focusing on what we're uncomfortable with, we're focusing on solution. And so what we're doing tonight is the first two steps of this, which gives us that feeling of like, oh, this is what it feels like to operate from here. And, you know, most of what the work we do with Aligned Living is about how to stay here. You know, it's funny, I always joke that it's called Aligned Living, not Aligned Moments. And the whole key to this is learning to stay in this place, because what we resonate with, you know, anybody that's looked at any of the law of attraction stuff, what we resonate with, the frequency that we're putting out, it has matches, and what's in harmony with it gets drawn towards us, and what's in disharmony with it gets drawn away. And when we're tapped into our surroundings, our frequency, our resonance is constantly in flux. It's constantly moving all over the place depending on our surroundings. You know, I'm sure you've noticed that, where you can be in a good mood and you run into somebody that's in a bad mood, and all of a sudden you feel yourself getting caught up in it. And the more sensitive we are, the more it happens. You know, it's funny. I have this client who's just super, super highly sensitive, and she would talk about being at the grocery store when she was going through a divorce. And it was a small town, so there's a lot of people that knew her, and people had different opinions about it. Like there were people that, you know, she basically was leaving a wealthy husband and choosing a much simpler life. And there was a lot of women in the town that were in similar boats, but weren't going to make that big, bold move because they were enjoying the luxury of their life. And the women that were in that situation, she said when she would run into them, it was like she would just feel like awful about herself and like, oh my God, what am I doing to my kids? Like, am I making a mistake? And she talked about being at the grocery store, running into somebody that was like that, walking around the next corner of the aisle and seeing somebody who had done something similar, who was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing what you're doing. And she went from feeling horrible to feeling on top of the world. And it happens through the expression, but it also happens through the electromagnetic field, through that push and pull. And so when we break free of that, and we learn to live in a place where what we're vibrating at, it takes a little bit of time for that stabilization to start to call in these new experiences. And not only does it call them in, but it also repels. It's like this, you know, people that are more sensitive tend to really struggle with boundaries. And so as we live in this alignment, basically it creates a natural boundary system for what's not in resonance with us. And it's pretty remarkable to be inside of and to stabilize in it and live in it. Cool. Did somebody have something to share? No.
It creates a sense of freedom. There's so much. Once I am in my alignment, it's like there's just a great sense of freedom. Like the situation I was thinking about, I was like, oh, and to be able to just have freedom and more love and compassion, which is great.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. It's a little bit counterintuitive, because I think that's one of the primary concerns people often have when they first experience aligned living, or when I talk to them about it, they're like, well, I don't want to feel disconnected from people. But what really happens is, because people are no longer contagious, we're able to be so much more deeply connected with them. And we can still know and understand, but when our internal world doesn't, you know, when we're not in training with them and shifting who we are by interacting with them, all of a sudden, like, they're so much more fun to be around. I've had a lot of clients who had difficult family relationships. And what they found was, you know, they spent their whole life wanting their sibling or their parent to change. And what they found is, when they changed internally, it didn't matter so much how their parent or their sibling was acting, that they were actually able to even appreciate them, because it wasn't making them feel good or bad or indifferent. They were doing their thing, and the client was doing their thing. That they were two separate people. And because there wasn't a contagiousness and impactfulness, people were able to appreciate each other. And, you know, it's really fascinating, the impact that it has. Awesome. Anybody else wanted to share anything they were experiencing? Or? Awesome. All right. Well, I wanted to share an experience. This was, Yeah, let me just make sure that covered all the main stuff. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to share with you, this is a video from, I do a 10-week program. It's a small group program of like 8 people. And this was at the very beginning of week 7. So it was after 6 weeks, I guess, of working with Aligned Living and doing the weekly group coachings. And I got talking with three of the participants, and they were sharing what they'd already noticed. And so I wanted to share with you all this short video. And so it's Adam and Sadie and Dr. Allen who are sharing a bit about their experience. So let me screen share it, and then I will, if I can get to the screen share. All right, here we go. Now I'll just launch there we go. All right, so let me start the video here. Should be good. Do you feel more relaxed in your body generally now? Is that?
Yeah, I think I do, and I've been noticing just all sorts of different shifts. A couple of different things. Like, for one thing, it's really helped me tune into energy and my own energy and how that works. And I feel like I've just gained a whole new relationship to energy and also to the imagination and how that plays a part, because that had never been something that I was aware of.
Sure.
So now I'm finding opportunities to kind of play around with that.
Nice.
You know?
Yeah, do you feel like you're more playful too?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's part of the feeling more comfortable. We become more playful, which brings more joy, which brings, it's all like, it just keeps building on itself. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then one other thing to mention is just how people have been responding to me differently. Like, I had a major breakthrough conversation with my older brother last night.
That's awesome.
Something that was like, I didn't know if that was ever going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And he was just so receptive to me in ways that he'd never been before.
Wow. Yeah.
So experiences like that, I've had that experience with my brother, my sister, a friend of mine. Like, all of a sudden, they're like just responding differently to me in ways that are just really good, really positive.
Really beautiful. And it's amazing when we're in that channel, like, it puts people at ease. They feel seen and comfortable and safe, right? We're not out pushing on things that make us uncomfortable about them. We're letting them be, and we're being in our own space, which makes them feel safe and able to go there. It takes away the threat.
I was drawn to you and I didn't know what Aligned Living was, and when I went to the workshop, I had a lot of epiphanies, and how, for me, I came into it very much like Adam, very into self-development and learning how to manage my energy, and people that I work with and just my life in general has very much set me up to get to learn these things very well so that I can show up and support people in my ways as well. And I had been brought the experience of what you do before, and you helped me to expand that beyond what I even thought was possible. And so me now having access to that understanding and to the lockdown, that was so helpful, and different concepts that had come to me prior, integrating with what I've learned from you, I feel made it, like I said, 100 times more powerful, and I can access it easier, I can understand it better, and I can explain it better as well. And really tuning into the core of myself and having, like Adam said, like that Jedi mind, those tools, those techniques to activate stuff has been really, really powerful for me. Really like seeing that it's so easy. I think before I'm like, oh, it's so hard, it's so difficult to manage energy, to get centered and grounded, and it's really just a matter of like getting there. And so I very much appreciate you, and thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. That's great to hear. I'm glad you're hitting all these goals.
I've just recently drawn connections between like what I do in my office, between what you do, and like things like Joe Dispenza meditations, and basically using our imagination to create connections between us and our field and how to move energy and organize it in a way that suits us and is powerful and serves us and other people. I'm like really, really grateful for the schools. And I think the one of the coolest things that I just like thought of is like it's really become like a North Star for me. Is like the aligned living technique is like something for me to focus on that is like to keep me centered in my power, you know? So, yeah, and it's so helpful. And one thing I will say, it's like, I think Adam said it too, it's like people are freaking noticing, you know, like the radiating part, it's like crazy. Yeah.
That'll happen to me at the grocery store. I will have so many people just like stare at me and I'm like, what are you looking at? But I recognize that there's an energetic thing that people don't know that's what they're drawn to, but I notice it being on the outside looking.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's funny. Like I feel like people often think like, is that somebody? You know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it is somebody.
David,
Awesome. So our energy affects everything. It's really amazing how much is going on there that most of us have never realized. And so when we start to play in that world, it's really, really remarkable. And so, like I was saying tonight, we've gone through the first two of the 7 main steps of aligned living, and I hope it's been really powerful for you, and I hope you can really see the value of what it's like, of what would shift in your life if you lived in this. You know, when I look at the clients, particularly the ones I've been working with, for a while, or have gone through the 10-week program, or I've worked with one-on-one, it's just so remarkable to watch really the things that used to derail them, that they're just not that interested anymore, that don't feel that important, and their ability to go after, and it doesn't need to be in an assertive way, an aggressive way. They know what they want, and that becomes their focus rather than focusing on the things that made them uncomfortable before. And so that takes more time. There's only so much we can do, obviously, in a little over an hour tonight. And so what I wanted to do is invite you as well to future opportunities of how else you can work with me, with Aligned Living, to be able to have it be something that becomes sustainable, to be able to be in this state on a regular basis, to be able to benefit from what you choose from this place. It's a form of a flow state. And so 3 different ways to work with me. Basically, I do have a video course. It's a 6-week course, and it covers all the basics, all the activations, and it's, it can be self-paced. It drips out each week, so you get a new set of videos each week. And it's really powerful. It's amazing how the energy just shows up with it. It's all part of stuff that we only partially understand. But that's been really fun to share with people. And then I also offer the 10-week group coaching, and that's 8 people. So it's a really nice small group. We do it through Zoom, and it's been really fun. That's what those 3, Adam and Sadie and Dr. Allen, were all part of that group from the last one that I did. And so it was fun to have them share some of their experiences. And so, like I said, it goes for 10 weeks. The next one is actually starting next Wednesday, so a week from tonight, and I do have a few spots left in that if you're feeling drawn to, which I can share more about. And then the last one is the one-to-one session. So it's I lost my mouse here. I'm gonna have to hit exit here. Sorry. I had full screen, my mouse went away. And so I do one-to-one sessions as well, which people can apply for. That I'm only working with about 3 people at a time now with one-to-one sessions. I've really felt like the groups are what I'm called to do now, because I can reach a lot more people at once. And it's so fun to take people through this experience, to watch the dramatic shifts in their lives. And it was interesting. I train coaches in this too. And one of the people I was working with, that they did their first session where they bring in somebody they know, and together, me and the coach take them through their first experience with Aligned Living, and it was so profound. Like this one I'm thinking of, and I was saying to the coach and trainer, I said, that person's life, it's never going to be the same. Their perspective on energy, their perspective on their ability to know themselves and feel themselves, like that's just a lifelong experience now. And as we learn to stabilize in it, it all just becomes exponential. And so it's kind of a funny thing, like as I offer like further assistance in this, generally people are in such a good state. They're in something that feels so nice and comfortable. And, as Brian was saying, like I feel indestructible, or I feel, I can't remember the exact words that you used, Brian, but from that place, we don't feel like we need anything. And so it's kind of an interesting thing as I offer this, people are like, well, I don't need anything. I'm good. But if you're really enjoying this, if you want this to be your regular sustained state and be able to be here when you want to be able to live from this place, that's really where the next work comes in. And so, like it's such an interesting feeling. If nothing's wrong, we take the next right action rather than trying to alleviate the discomfort. And so I really do hope the next right action for you is reaching out to work in some way. And so there's an automated email that should come out to you guys in your mailboxes at 7:15 that kind of breaks down, it has links to all the different programs. And what I'd really love for you to do, though, is if you're interested in them, just reach out to me and I can share more about it. If you're not sure which program would be a better match, just email me, respond to that email, and I'd love to hop on the call with you and help you feel into that next right action, that what it is that's going to serve you best. And so let me, I'll go through just so you guys have the pricing too. Let me screen share this again. All right. I need to launch it again to play it. All right, so the 6-week video course is $497, and that can be 1 or 2 payments. And then the option for the 10-week group coaching. So we're looking at small groups of just 8 people, and it's really a semester long. I thought it was kind of fun to put it after a college semester. And so that's $1997, and it can be in 1 or 2 payments, and it starts next Wednesday, the 15th. And as a bonus too, if you end up signing up for the 10-week group coaching, you also get the video course, so that you can go ahead and start it right away. And so normally that's $497, so it's a nice bonus value to it. And then the one-to-one sessions, if it's something that you want to do, and if you're something you're interested in, there's an application, and there'll be a link to that in the email that you'll receive in a few minutes. And again, if you're curious about any of this, just please do reach out. And let me stop sharing. I'll bring my face back up here. Reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions or help you sort it out. And so I hope this was really powerful, valuable experience for you. And so as we're wrapping up here, is there any other questions or anything else people experienced that they wanted to share? If you've been wanting to say something, but you've been shy, it's pinned on me too, so your face won't show up if you're on video, just your voice will. So I'd love to hear from anybody else that had any final questions or comments or experiences to share. Any takers? No. All right. Well, it's been so fun to take you all through this, and it's funny. One of the things that has been really important to me is that the experience that I'm offering in these is really valuable just by itself. And, of course, offering the continued support, but I want to make sure that anybody that shows up tonight to the free event, that they really get a lot out of it. And, it's funny that there's a couple people that are here tonight that have been at other ones. So it just felt great. It was really like great proof that, well, if they're showing up more than once to have this experience, that they're having a substantial experience. So thank you so much for showing up. And Brian, did you have a question or a comment?
No, I just want to say I miss you, David. My family, as you know, we love going to San Diego, and every time we come to San Diego, we try to see you. So we're grateful for everything you've done for us and for me and helping me. And I hear you're not in San Diego anymore. Or
Yeah, we're up in Ashland, Oregon now. We decided we had to get back to the trees and mountains. So it's beautiful up here, but we do miss the sunny beaches on the sunny days. But it's
I bet. Well, we're gonna miss you, man, and I hope you're doing well up there. And maybe we can make it out to Oregon sometime. And
yeah,
visit.
come up for the Shakespeare Festival.
All right. I'll see what we can do, what I can do. But either way, we're going to stay in touch. So I appreciate you letting me in on this video tonight.
Absolutely, Brian. It's so good to hear your voice, and thanks for joining in. And I hope that one of those opportunities ends up being a great match for you. And I'm sure we'll connect again.
Absolutely, David. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Awesome. Stephanie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. It'll be exciting to see where this all goes in 5 years. I was sensitive and didn't really have a language for it until much later, and working with you just solidifies things so much for me. So I'm incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm glad that you're getting so much out of it. It's fun to watch it unfold. It's really an exciting process, and I get such a kick out of watching people that have been so influenced by their surroundings, or maybe even people that didn't even know how much they were influenced, watch them break free and be like, oh, whole new reality. So thank you. I get so much out of offering this. So much appreciated. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, please do reach out to me. And if, like I said, I'm going to give this as a replay too. So if you're watching this as a replay, please do reach out. Like if there's any questions you have, if there's something you're interested in, if you're not sure where to go with it, don't hesitate to reach out. I always love connecting. Such a pleasurable part of this work. All right. So blessings to everybody. Have a great night. Thank you so much for joining in, and stay aligned. So have a great night.